Shalom, my dear friends, and thank you for joining me today, the 26th of May of the year 2024, the 18th of Iyar of this year of redemption, 5784. Today, the 33rd day of the Omer count, Lag BaOmer. Today we celebrate the teaching of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who unveiled to the world the profoundest secrets of our Holy Torah. And as we do observe Lag BaOmer today, here in the north of Israel under fire, we've had rockets aimed across up and down Israel, particularly at the center of the country, and nevertheless here we are continuing with our mission. And today, in the merit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and in the merit of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, who is the carrier of the soul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the latter generations, I'd like to share with you a story that has been very special and important to me at different junctures in my life. And it's a story about the fundamental attribute of the believer in the one God, that is the attribute of emunah, of faith, that we call trust, bitachon. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslev told the following story in the year 1806, in the summer of that year, just prior to his embarking on the 13 Sipurim Maisius, the 13 stories that he said come from the primordial years and days of creation. And here is a very seemingly straightforward story which is filled with practical guidance for us today at a time when people across the world are going through the most extraordinary challenges. People are today challenged in ways that we could never have thought possible, and it goes from one challenge to the next, with things that we used to take for granted all of a sudden falling apart. And that's why I think this story, with its great charm and its amazing climax, can be so helpful to us today. So here is Reb Nachman's story of the attribute of trust, bitachon, believing that whatever happens to us anytime is always for our own ultimate good. Everything is sent to us by God Almighty, to each and every one of us, under a completely individual providence, hashgacha pratit, a providence that is personal to each and every one of us, and the Almighty is guiding us to each to his or her own ultimate fulfillment. And as Reb Nachman opens in the fourth teaching of his work, Likutei Moharan, part 1, there he tells us, if a person will know that everything that happens to them is only for their ultimate good, this person will enjoy the likeness of the world to come, even in this world. So here then is Rabbi Nachman's story, the story about trust, also known as the story of the fixer. Well, there was a certain king who thought to himself, who in the world has fewer worries than me? I have everything good. I'm the king, I'm the ruler. And the king decided to investigate if this was true. He went out at night and stood behind each house to hear what people were talking about. And all he heard was each person's worries. One had problems in his shop. At a different house, he heard somebody talking about a problem that needed government assistance. Each and every one had their own worries. One night, the king saw a very low house. It was like a cellar built half underground with windows at ground level. The roof was broken and sagging, and there the king saw a man sitting playing his fiddle. The king had to listen very carefully just to hear the music. The man was very happy. He had a jug of wine and various foods in front of him, and he was very happy. He was full of joy, with no worries whatever. The king, who was in disguise, went into the house and asked the man how he was doing. The man invited the stranger to sit down, and the king saw the jug of wine and the various foods, and how the man was simply full of joy. He served his guest a drink and drank a toast to the king. Out of affection for this man, the king also drank. Afterwards he lay down to sleep, and he could see that the man was completely happy, with no worries at all. In the morning, the king rose, and so did the man. He accompanied the king out of the house. "From where do you get all this?" asked the king. "I know how to repair things," replied the man. "I can repair anything that is broken. I can't make anything from scratch, but if something gets broken, I can repair it. Each morning I go out and repair a few things. Then when I've earned 5 or 6 shillings, I purchase all this food and drink for myself." When the king heard this, he said to himself, "I'm gonna spoil it for him." The king went back to the palace, took off his disguise, and issued a decree forbidding anyone who had something in need of repair from giving it to somebody else to repair. Either he'd have to repair it himself or buy a new one. That morning the man went out looking for people with things in need of repair. But they told him the king had decreed that it was forbidden to give anything to someone else to repair. The man was very upset about this, but he had trust in God. As he was walking, he noticed a householder chopping wood. "Why do you have to chop the wood?" said the man. "Is that fitting for somebody of your status?" "Well, I tried to find somebody to chop wood for me," replied the householder, "but I couldn't find anyone, so I was forced to chop it myself." "Well, give it to me," said the man, the fixer. "I'll chop it for you." He chopped the wood, and the householder paid him a shilling, and the man saw this was a good way to earn money, and he went to chop more wood until he had earned 6 shillings. He again brought his entire meal, and it really was a feast, and he was very happy. That night, the king again peered in through the window of the man's house and saw him sitting there with his food and drink before him in a very happy mood. The king, in disguise, went into the house, and as on the previous night, he slept there, and in the morning the man rose and accompanied the king out. "From where do you get this?" asked the king. "To buy this, you need money." "Well, I used to repair anything that was broken," replied the man. But the king passed a decree prohibiting giving anything out to someone else for repair. "So I chopped wood until I earned enough money for this." The king left him, went back to the palace, and issued a decree that nobody must give their wood to anyone else to chop. When the man approached somebody offering to chop his wood, the person told him that the king had issued a decree not to give anybody wood to chop. The man was very upset about this because he had no money, but he had trust in God. As he was walking, he noticed somebody cleaning out a stable. "Is it fitting for you to have to clean out this stable?" he asked. "I looked for somebody to clean it out, but I couldn't find anyone, so I have to do it myself." "Let me," said the man. "I'll clean it." He set to work and cleaned out the whole stable, and the owner gave him 2 shillings. He went and cleaned more stables until he had earned 6 shillings. Again he brought a whole feast and went home, and the meal was a feast, and he was very happy. Again the king came to look, and once again he saw that everything was as it had been before. The king, again in disguise, went inside and stayed the night. In the morning the man accompanied the king out. The king asked him how he'd managed, and the man explained. The king issued a decree, making it forbidden to employ anyone else to clean out one's stable. That morning the man went in search of stables to clean, but people told him that the king had passed a decree forbidding this. The man went to the king's recruiting officer to sign up as a soldier in the army. Some soldiers are forcibly conscripted for army service, but others are hired soldiers who serve for pay. The man went to the recruiting officer to sign up for pay, but he made a condition with the recruiting officer that he was not signing up permanently, but only for a while, and that he was to receive his pay each morning for that day's work. The officer immediately dressed him in army uniform, hung a sword at his side, and sent him where he was needed. Towards evening, after he'd completed all his duties, he threw off his uniform and went to buy his whole meal, and the meal was a feast. He went home and he was very happy. Again the king went to look and saw that everything was ready in front of the man, that he was very happy. The king, in disguise, went into the man's house and lay down. In the morning he asked him how he'd managed, and the king told him what he'd done. The king summoned the recruiting officer. He instructed him not to dare pay wages to anyone that day. That morning, when the man went to the recruiting officer to collect his day's pay, the officer refused to give it to him. "But I made a condition with you to pay me every day," the man protested. "The king has decreed not to pay anyone today," replied the recruiting officer. All the man's pleas were to no avail. "I'll be happy to pay you tomorrow for 2 days," said the officer, "but today it's impossible to pay." What did the man do? He broke off the blade of his sword from its handle and replaced it with a piece of wood. When the sword was in its sheath, this was not in the least visible from the outside. The man pawned the blade of the sword, and with the money he received, he brought the whole meal, and the meal was a feast. The king arrived and saw that the man was completely happy as before. Again the king entered the house and lay down. He asked him how he had managed, and the man told him the whole story, how he had been forced to break the blade of the sword from the handle, and how he had pawned it in order to buy what he needed for the meal. "And afterwards," explained the fixer, "when I receive the pay for that day, I'll redeem the blade and repair the sword, and nobody will be able to see a thing, because I can repair anything that's broken, so there'll be no loss to the king." The king went to his palace and summoned the recruiting officer. He told him that a certain criminal had been condemned to death. He instructed the officer to call this particular soldier that he had hired and order him, and only him, to cut off the condemned man's head. The officer summoned the man, who came before the king, now dressed in his royal clothes. The king gave instructions for all his ministers to assemble in order to witness this comic spectacle, exposing a man who had stuck a piece of wood in his sword in place of the blade. The man came before the king and fell at his feet. "My lord the king, "Why have I been summoned?" he asked. "In order to cut off this condemned criminal's head," replied the king. The man pleaded that he'd never in his life shed blood. He begged the king to call someone else for this. The king answered that he and nobody else was obliged to kill the man. "Is the verdict so clear-cut?" asked the fixer. "Perhaps it's not so clear that he deserves to die. I've never shed blood in my life. How could I shed blood when it's not clear that the prisoner deserves to die?" The king replied that there was no shadow of a doubt that the prisoner deserved to die, and you and nobody else must execute him. The man saw he could not prevail over the king, so he turned to God and said, "Eternal God, never in my life have I shed blood. If this man is not guilty, let the blade of my sword turn into wood." He took hold of the sword and drew it from the sheath, and everybody saw that it was made of wood. Everybody laughed heartily, and the king saw that he was an excellent man and sent him off in peace. Well, this is Rabbi Nachman's very beautiful story about trust, with its amazing ending, and like all of Rabbi Nachman's parables and stories, so very, very deep. Let's reflect first of all that this man is called the fixer. That is to say that his mission in life is to make repairs, and this is understandable on the simple level, the straightforward level of pshat, that the man is fixing anything that is broken, but this also has the connotation of the tikkunim, the repairs that we all have to make throughout our lives in this world. That is what we are here for. We are sent into this world as part of our eternal journey that God Almighty sends each and every one of us on, each and every one on their own completely unique route through all of the experiences and vicissitudes of life. And each time the fixer is presented with situations that he has to find his way around. And we see that the king who is testing the fixer, who is clearly symbolic of the King of the universe, God Almighty, who tests each and every one of us, actually appears in the story in two ways. In one way, the king appears in his disguise, going around to all the houses and checking out on each and every one of us. What are we talking about? What are we thinking about? What are we doing with our lives? And the king finds his way to this lowly, humble house of the man who is really the fulfillment of the saying of our sages, happy is the person who is happy with their share. The fixer is a man who lives each day for that day. As long as he can do his work, perform his labors, and gain his deserved and earned sustenance for that day, then he is able to attain the simcha that he wishes to fiddle and to rejoice and to experience the true simcha, the true joy for which we were really created. The fiddle, the violin, has perhaps an interesting significance. The Hebrew word that we translate as a fiddle, a stringed instrument, is a kinor. The Hebrew word kinor is essentially spelled with the letters chof, nun, vov, resh. So those four letters, chof, nun, vov, resh, were divided into two sets, chof, vov, and nun, resh, or resh, nun. Resh, nun is the Hebrew word ner, the candle, the lamp. soul. And Chof Vov is the two Hebrew letters of the alphabet that have the numerical value of 20 and 6. 26, which is the numerical value of the essential name of the creator of the world, Havaya. So the kinor is the musical instrument which each and every one of us has, namely how we play our lives, how we go up and down the scale in our lives, seeking at every stage what is apparently good, palpably good, obviously good, we enjoy. When things are not good, when we go down in the scale, we have to search and look until we find the godly spark that will give meaning to that downward movement. So the fiddler, the fixer, is playing his soul and going up and down in the vicissitudes of life, trying each day to get the best out of that day. The fixer trying to make repairs wherever he can see the opportunity. And the king, who is testing all of us, comes in disguise, and we are innocently talking and telling all of our secrets to people that we may believe and think are our dear friends, without realizing that they are taking it all down and possibly going to use it against us. The king has this double role here. He appears to the man as his dear good friend and confidant that the man has no fear divulging his secrets to, and then the king goes back and creates all these challenging situations for the fixer, just like God Almighty is with each and every one of us in our thoughts, in our minds, in our hearts, around us, in the people around us, all the experience we go through, and also on high is looking down and watching each and every one of us, seeing how he will bring us through the vicissitudes of our lives to his intended goal for us. So the king shows up and discovers how the man's secret is that he's only living each day for that day. And as long as he can make his 6 shillings and go down to the store and buy his food, he's going to be able to sing his song and rejoice. And the king says, that's not good enough. He's not been tested yet. Let's see if we can spoil it for him. And so the king goes back to the palace and makes his decree that nobody may give items to be repaired to anybody else. And our fixer is not an automatic, robotic tzaddik who is able to rejoice at every moment, even in great adversity. He's dejected, and that's quite reasonable when we face things that suddenly fly in the face of everything that we've been working towards and building, and suddenly it gets knocked down because of circumstances beyond our control. And we must believe that it's all sent by God Almighty, but we get dejected because our hopes and our aspirations have been dashed. And what we see when the fixer is going around somewhat aimlessly, when he notices that a person is chopping wood, and that's still legal, and he says to the man, why do you have to do this? Let me do it for you. What happens here is that our fixer also fixes the adversity of the situation by going through a gestalt switch. The previous pathway of earning his sustenance was closed off for him, but whereas a proud person committed to their own ideas and their own goals might say, well, I demand that I should be able to go back to fix things, and I'm going to demonstrate and scream and shout until they change the law back. That's not going to help him. The gestalt switch that he makes is willing to do something that somebody else may be unwilling to do because it's not so dignified. But here the fixer is willing to do something rather undignified in order to get by, and he offers the man to chop his wood and finds it's a good way to make a living. He chops more wood till he gets it 6 shillings. Our sages in the Talmud tell us that we're all gifted by God with the Yetzer Ra, with the evil inclination. We are gifted with the 2 inclinations, the good inclination that feeds us with good and positive thoughts about the good, virtuous, righteous things we could do, as opposed to the evil inclination that feeds us with negative thoughts. And it would be the negative, the evil inclination that would say, I can't chop wood, that's beneath my dignity. The Talmud says when the Yetzer Ra, the evil inclination, will not allow the person to take fire in the service of good. Just like if you have a big thick log which won't take fire, you have to chop it into smaller pieces, and then the small pieces will take fire. So here too our fixer sees that he must break down his pre-existing notions, that he must find his sustenance in a particular way, and is willing to entertain the idea that there will be alternative pathways, and he sees it and he finds the way. And again the story repeats itself. The king shows up and asks, how did you do? And the fixer, trusting the king who's in disguise, again divulges his secrets, and the king now goes back to the palace and makes a new decree. A new challenge is set up for the man. The path that you thought was going to be possible for you is now also closed up. And now, again, he's dejected quite naturally. That's okay. You're allowed to be dejected when things go against you. But we have to take the adversity as a sign that we need to rethink. We need to perform a new gestalt switch. We need to ask, how can I step out of my pre-existing conceptions of what I think is good for me, and understand that there must lie in now the new situation that's been sent some good for me. And at first it may be difficult to find it, but we have to search. And I think in the second solution of the fixer to clean out stables, we see just how far we have to go with this, in literally being willing to enter into the murkiest, the filthiest areas of our inner selves in order to perform the tikkunim, the repairs that we need to perform to open ourselves to acquaintance and knowledge of God. So here the fixer is not above going into the muck and the filth of the stable of the stubborn horse, and he's willing to clean out the muck. And again the king stops by, and the innocent fixer divulges the secret, and the king goes back and says nobody can clean out stables anymore. Now the fixer is faced with an existential choice. Existential choice that we all have to make if we're going to make it through this world to attain our fulfillment. We have to understand that our mission in this world is to become soldiers and fighters in the army of the Supreme God. An army that does not fight with the cowardly methods of attacking the weak, little children, old people, defenseless people, with random violence, with rape, with plunder, and every other kind of abhorrent behavior. The army of God Almighty is the army of the people who make the true repairs, fixing creation by revealing godliness everywhere. And we're entering into the service of God Almighty. We enter into God's army. And our fixer goes to the recruiting officer and is able to make a deal with him at first that he'll get paid every day. That is the really important thing for our fixer, that no day is ever lost. You have to squeeze out the good from every day. No matter what, there must lie somewhere in this day some spiritual sustenance. And he makes his deal with the recruiting officer to get his pay every day. And once again, the king comes by and stops off this avenue of livelihood. And it's now that the fixer comes up with this amazing idea to remove the blade of his sword and to pawn it in the pawn shop, meanwhile replacing it with a piece of wood which he sticks in with the handle of the sword into the sheath, believing that that's going to save him and that it will not harm him to divulge his secrets to the strange visitor that keeps on showing up every night. So again, the fixer innocently reveals the secret to the king, who goes back to the palace and calls in the recruiting officer to set up this demonstration where the fixer is going to be publicly exposed as having illegally removed the blade of his government-issued sword in order to get his 6 shillings. And here I think at the end of the story we really do see how it's a story about the lives of each and every one of us. It's not always so simple with the things that people happen when a person's livelihood is shattered. We have now the many people who are suffering the most terrible injuries from war and from battle, with lost limbs, lost faculties, not to speak about those who have lost sons and daughters and brothers and sisters and fathers. The most extraordinary suffering. It's not always so simple to make that gestalt switch. Sometimes it takes an enormous effort to do so, because we're really in a story of life and death. This story of the fixer is the story of everyone, how we can turn lives of death, where we're constantly encountering negativity and failure and frustration, how we can actually turn all this to our advantage. And the answer is through the humility, whereby we say it does not necessarily have to be the way I expect it, I demand it. We've all, particularly people over the ages of their 40s and 50s and 60s now, have lived in a different world than the one we are seeing emerging in front of us. And people across the world in all kinds of situations are going through the most terrible trials, and all the signs are that the trials of many people are only likely to increase. We who are attached to the God of Israel and the Torah of Israel and the people of Israel, we can only find cause now to rejoice in spite of the suffering that so many of us and all of our people are experiencing, as are our allies and supporters across the world, who are very many, but their voices are getting drowned out by well-oiled and well-financed publicity of our enemies and opponents. And despite this adversity, it is incumbent upon us to turn this sword of death into a tree of life, which is precisely what the fixer succeeds in doing at the climax of the story. The Torah was given on Mount Sinai, which is also called Mount Chorev. The word Chorev has many connotations. The charuv, the fruit of the charuv, which is very Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai survived off the dried charuvim for so many years. This mysterious fruit, which is long and black, the looks like the beard of a person and contains some sweetness, but it is like swords to the flesh of a person. And the Torah is sweet if you chew it long enough, but can be like a sword. And the word choref is not only the Hebrew word for a carob, charuv, but also the same letter spell out the word cherev, a sword. The Torah was given at Choreb, which has the connotation of chaver, a friend, a true ally, one to whom one is attached. The Torah attaches us to the Creator, but if we in any way abuse the Torah turns into a vengeful sword. And here it is through the words of the fixer at the climax of the story. He says, look, this person who is under trial, the criminal in the story, is actually me. Each one of us is on trial. And it's a trial of life and death. The trial is to determine are we going to go up or we're going to go down, both in this world and in the life that follows this world, literally trials of life and death. And we have it in the power of our tongues. Instead of complaining incessantly, instead of only negatively depicting all that is happening, if we search out and find ways to reinterpret what is going on in ways that will in fact be positive, you cannot reverse the loss of somebody who's been killed. You cannot normally reverse the loss of a limb, God forbid, or the loss of a faculty. And to accept this in terms of this world, where the majority of people are fortunate enough to be normal and to have all their faculties and have a healthy body, there's no way in this world to truly comfort a person who has lost something vital except by saying that, there is some ulterior purpose behind why this was sent for you, and that ulterior purpose is for your ultimate good. Maybe not in this world of superficial pleasures and superficial attraction, but in the world of truth that lies afterwards. Your suffering in this world will release you from a whole load that might otherwise have accompanied the person when they leave this world for the judgment afterwards. For we are all under judgment, and we all must search for the ways to redeem ourselves and our lives through finding the formula of words with which we may turn our challenges and our sorrows into causes for rejoicing. We're now indeed at a critical time, and one of the things that we see going on in the world today is a process of separation between those who are with the God of Israel and the people of Israel who are striving to uphold the Torah of the God of Israel, as opposed to those who are unable to see any of this. Moreover, those who are willfully blinding themselves to the facts of history and reality that are available to everybody. We are witnessing across the world, we have seen maybe faster than we could have imagined over the last months, particularly in the time since last October and the terrible terror invasion of Israel, and the polarization that has occurred since then with the enormous protests across the world against what the state of Israel is doing in order to seek protection for her citizens. And all of this is being interpreted by people across the world in a way that is completely blind and ignoring the facts of the situation. We are facing this clarification between the good guys and the not good guys. It really eventually boils down to that, this time of separation. It used to be that the teachers of Torah had to go out to seek those who were outside of the pale of the Torah. You were laughed at if you were preaching to the choir, to the people who were inside. But now that's changing. There are people who are outside of the Torah, who want to stay outside, who keep themselves outside by their abominable hatred of anything to do with Judaism, Jews, Israel, and Zionism. These people are keeping themselves out of God's Torah, and they will never be able to get in because of the wickedness of their tongues. And those of us who have been called upon by God Almighty to enter the pathways of the Torah, to seek to embrace the life of the Torah, we are now seeing that people whom formerly we looked at as those with something to say, those that we should respect and reach out to, we are seeing that these people are turning into our enemies who will simply not listen to anything, so we have no need anymore to address them. In our time, the people that we need to address are Jewish people and non-Jewish people who are the allies of Israel and the God of Israel and the Torah of Israel. We all need to strengthen each other and to teach and remind each other that the foundation of all of our faith is precisely, as I said earlier in the words of Rabbi Nachman from the beginning of the fourth lesson of Likutei Moharan Part 1, when a person knows that everything is sent to them for their ultimate good, for their ultimate benefit, this person has the experience already in this life of the world to come. That is to say, there are two aspects of godly revelation. There's the aspect of God's self-revelation, where God manifests His God in us in ways that we understand that this is God. And like in our story where the king puts on a disguise when he comes to talk personally to the fixer, God has this other aspect of hiddenness, the side of Gevurah, where God puts a mask on His deeds and activities. And the fundamental lesson of the faith of the Torah, the lesson of the Shema that we recite morning and evening, is that God's aspect of chesed, of kindness, Hashem, and God's aspect of gevurah, of severity and of concealment, Elokim, they are one. The two sides are one. And when we will understand that in adversity, we must also see here the finger of God. When we will understand this, we are on our way to experience the unity and the sublime bliss of the life of the world to come already while in this world. Because as soon as we understand this, the secrets of creation will begin to be revealed to us. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai brought into the world the Torah that is written in the Holy Zohar, the foundation of all of our Kabbalistic wisdom, the foundation of all the subsequent Kabbalistic texts of Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the Ari of the writings of Chassidut. And in the Holy Zohar, one of the most important of all the teachings is that the Torah must not be understood only on the level of pshat, on the level of a simple, straightforward narrative, a story, a statement of laws that refer to precisely what they appear to refer to in simple everyday language. The Torah tells us that there are many, many specific acts which we perform at specific junctures. We must not muzzle ox when the ox is performing our agricultural labors for us. We must not have our cart pulled by an ox and a donkey together by two separate species. We may not mix milk and meat together in one of the same cooked dish. we must not mix linen and wool threads together in one of the same garment. While we may eat leavened bread all of the days of the year, from the 15th of Nisan till the 21st, we do not eat leavened bread, and so on. Many, many specific commandments. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes to teach us, yes, there's a whole Talmud and a whole Shulchan Aruch of all of the specific laws that derive from all of these Torah commandments. And at exactly the same time, we must also understand that the Torah, while it speaks in the language of men, the language of people, using the images from this world, we speak about oxen and sheep and cattle, we speak about tents and caravans in the wilderness, we speak about mountains, fields, and all the different things of this life. God set up the creation of the world He made for us, to provide us with a language through which we may understand God on the level of homily, on the level of symbolism. That at the same moment that the lion or the ox are nothing but a real everyday lion in the jungle or an ox out in the prairies, at the same time the lion is also an expression of an aspect of God's chesed, His kindness, as taught in the prophecy of Ezekiel. The ox is an expression of God's aspect of Geburah, and so too with all of the items and all of the situations. A plant or tree becomes a symbol of how the different aspects of God, the different branches, are organically connected as one, stemming from one root and from one stem. And so all of the things of this world, and particularly all of the teachings of our Torah, they all have, besides the pshat, simple meaning, the aspect of sod, the secret level that is open to all who approach the Torah with appropriate reverence for God and love of God. When we enter the Torah with the faith that God has provided us with a document that speaks in the language of human beings, tells us beautiful stories, little snippets about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, sets up little situations about an ox that gores another ox, a man that hires a servant, and many other individual situations that all have meaning on many, many other levels. And this is precisely what gives this world its infinite potential for wealth, because when we read a novel, when we learn a scientific fact, the fact is a fact and that's it. It doesn't symbolize anything else except itself. But when we learn a Torah idea, we are simultaneously bringing into our souls an idea that has meaning on many, many different levels, from the highest spiritual level down to the lowest material level simultaneously. So what wealth we are gaining from every Torah teaching we internalize, and from every Torah commandment that we fulfill. So now as we enter the last third of our count towards the festival of the giving of the Torah, as we are striving to keep the Torah at a time when the whole world is turning against us, let us understand that all of this adversity is truly being sent to us for the ultimate good of the people of Israel and the ultimate good of the world. The world is undergoing a process of separation between the gooders and the not gooders. We are watching this, we are seeing how people are now coming out, the wicked are confessing their wickedness without a shadow of shame. We are seeing that the forces of evil are actually going to the ultimate evil and in the process of destroying ourselves. It seems very likely that in the next decade we are going to be witnessing the destruction of much of Europe through war, and possibly much of the Americas and other parts of the world. And the one positive thing that we all have to keep us going amidst all this is that we have the promise and all who ally ourselves with the God of Israel and with the Torah of Israel will come through on the top, and that all of the challenges that we have to go through in this world will all turn out to have been only for the very best.